I pulled onto Trace's quiet suburban street that Tuesday afternoon, a fresh apple pie cooling on my passenger seat. I had been doing this monthly for 3 years, dropping off homemade treats for my daughter-in-law. But as I approached her driveway, my heart stuttered. Richard's silver sedan sat parked there, plain as day. My husband had told me this morning he had a dentist appointment across town. Confusion twisted into something darker as I parked down the street instead. My hands shook as I walked to the side window, pressing close to hear voices inside. The voices drifted through the slightly open window. Muffled, but unmistakable, Richard's voice, low and urgent, speaking words that made my blood run cold. "Brian can never know about this," my husband said. "The money has to stay hidden." I pressed myself against the siding, barely breathing. Trace's voice responded, strained and emotional. "We've been doing this for 2 years now, Richard. I feel terrible lying to him every day. This is eating me alive." 2 years, the words echoed in my skull. My vision narrowed to a pinpoint as my mind raced through the possibilities, each one more devastating than the last. Was my husband having an affair with our son's wife? With Tracy, the woman I had welcomed into our family, whom I had taught to make my grandmother's lasagna recipe, with whom I had spent countless Sunday dinners? I backed away from the window, my legs threatening to give out beneath me. The apple pie sat forgotten in my car as I stumbled back to it, gripping the door handle like a lifeline. My 38-year marriage, the family I had built and nurtured, my son's happiness, everything I believed in felt like sand slipping through my fingers. I sat in the driver's seat, unable to turn the key. My hands trembled so violently, I had to clasp them together in my lap. I thought about Richard kissing me goodbye this morning, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he checked his appointment book. "Dentist at 2, he had said. "Root canal follow-up. "'I'll be home by 4. I had made him a turkey sandwich for lunch, reminded him to take his blood pressure medication, kissed his cheek like I had done thousands of times before. The drive home passed in a fog. I kept seeing Trace's face at our last family dinner, the way she had smiled at Brian, my son, her husband. Had it all been an act? And Richard, my Richard, who had held my hand through my mother's funeral, who had coached Brian's Little League team, who had promised me forever on a sunny June day in 1987. Who was this man? When I walked into our house, the silence felt oppressive. Richard's coffee mug still sat by the sink where he had left it that morning. His crossword puzzle lay half-finished on the kitchen table. I moved through our home like a ghost, seeing everything with new eyes. How many lies had these walls witnessed? I found myself in Richard's home office, a small room off the hallway that he had claimed as his domain after retirement. His desk was neat, organized with the precision of a man who had spent 40 years as an accountant. I opened drawers carefully, not sure what I was looking for, but desperate for answers. Bank statements, tax returns, paid bills. Everything appeared normal, orderly, exactly as Richard always kept things. That night, I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling while Richard slept peacefully beside me. His breathing was steady, undisturbed by guilt or worry. I studied his face in the dim light filtering through the curtains. This face I had kissed for nearly 4 decades. The face I had memorized in every mood and expression. Now he looked like a stranger. Sleep finally came in fitful waves, near dawn. When I woke, Richard was already up, humming in the kitchen as he made his morning coffee. The normalcy of it felt obscene. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, kissing my forehead. "Sleep well." I managed a nod, not trusting my voice. He patted my shoulder and returned to his newspaper, completely at ease. A man without secrets would look just like this, I thought. But so would a skilled liar. After Richard left for what he claimed was a round of golf with his buddy Tom, I sat down at the computer. I realized with shame that I had not checked our bank accounts in months. Years, maybe. Richard had always handled our finances, and I had been content to let him. "I was an accountant for 40 years, Joni," he would say. "Let me handle the numbers. You handle making our house a home." I logged into our joint savings account, my fingers clumsy on the keyboard. When the balance appeared on the screen, I stared at it, not understanding at first. Then I pulled up our statements from 2 years ago and compared. $23,000 gone. I scrolled through the transaction history with growing horror. Withdrawals of $2,000 here, $3,000 there, spread out over 24 months. The dates jumped out at me. Every single one corresponded with a day Richard had claimed to have other plans. Golf outings, dentist appointments, lunch with old colleagues, meeting with our financial advisor. All lies. Every single one. I printed the statements with shaking hands, highlighting each withdrawal with a yellow marker. The pattern was undeniable. The evidence, irrefutable. My husband had been stealing from our savings and giving the money to our daughter-in-law for 2 years. And they had been meeting secretly, lying to everyone, destroying the foundation of our family. The question that haunted me was simple and devastating. Why? I became someone I did not recognize. For 3 days, I tracked my husband's movements like a detective following a suspect. I discovered that our cell phone family plan included a location sharing feature that Richard had set up years ago for emergencies. He had probably forgotten it existed. I had never used it before. Never felt the need to. Now I watched the little blue dot that represented my husband move around town, documenting where he went and comparing it to where he said he would be. Thursday morning, Richard told me he was meeting Tom for coffee and then going to the hardware store. The blue dot went straight to Trace's house, where it stayed for 2.5 hours. Friday afternoon, he claimed he had a follow-up appointment with our insurance agent. The blue dot never left Tracy's neighborhood. Each lie was a knife between my ribs. I kept a written log in a notebook I hid in my closet, recording dates, times, locations, and what Richard had told me versus where he actually was. The evidence mounted. On Saturday, I called my best friend Eleanor. We had known each other since our children were in elementary school together. If anyone could help me think clearly, it was Eleanor. "Come over," she said immediately when she heard the strain in my voice. "George is golfing. We can talk." In Eleanor's sunny kitchen, surrounded by her collection of ceramic roosters and the smell of fresh coffee, I broke down. I told her everything. Showed her the bank statements, the location logs, the timeline of lies. Eleanor listened, with her hand over her mouth, her eyes growing wider with each revelation. "Joan, this is serious," she said when I finished. "You need to confront him. Or hire a private investigator. You need real proof of what's going on." "I have proof," I said bitterly. "I have the money trail. I heard them with my own ears, but you don't know what it means." Eleanor pointed out gently. "You're assuming the worst. And maybe you're right too. But, Joan, this is Richard, the man who organized a surprise party for your 60th birthday, who cried at Brian's wedding. Are you absolutely certain about what you think is happening?" I wanted to be certain. I wanted the evidence to be wrong, the implications to be innocent. But the pattern was too clear. Eleanor suggested I hire someone to follow Richard, to document what was really happening at these meetings. But something in me resisted. This was my family, my life, my pain. I needed to understand it myself before I exposed it to strangers. That Sunday, we hosted our monthly family dinner. It was a tradition we had maintained since Brian got married 5 years ago. I roasted a chicken, made mashed potatoes and green beans, baked my mother's chocolate cake recipe. Everything as I always did. Brian arrived first, giving me a bear hug in the doorway. My son, 38 years old, still greeted me like he was 8. He looked tired, I noticed, with shadows under his eyes that had not been there before. When had that happened? When had I stopped really looking at my own child? Tracy came in behind him, and I forced myself to study her face as I accepted her kiss on my cheek. She looked exhausted too, almost fragile. Her smile did not quite reach her eyes. She handed me a bottle of wine and complimented my hair, and I searched her expression for signs of guilt, of deceit, of betrayal. I found only weariness. Richard carved the chicken with his usual precision, telling a story about something he had seen at the grocery store. Brian laughed, reaching for the potatoes. Tracy pushed food around her plate, eating very little. I watched the three of them interact, seeing the easy way Richard's hand rested on Tracy's shoulder when he asked if she wanted more water. The comfortable familiarity of it, a familiarity built over 2 years of secret meetings. I could barely swallow my own food. The chicken tasted like dust in my mouth. I smiled and nodded at appropriate moments. Played the role of wife and mother and hostess, while inside I felt like I was screaming. After they left, Richard helped me clean up, washing dishes while I dried. He kissed my cheek and called me sweetheart, and told me what a wonderful meal it had been. I looked at this man, my husband, and felt like I was looking at a stranger wearing his face. That night, I made a decision. I had to see for myself. I had to witness whatever was happening at Trace's house with my own eyes. No more hiding. No more wondering. I needed the truth, no matter how much it destroyed me. On Tuesday afternoon, I followed Richard. He left the house at 1:30, telling me he had an appointment with our estate planner. I waited 5 minutes, then got in my car and drove to Trace's neighborhood. I parked 3 houses down, partially hidden behind a large oak tree, and waited. Richard's car sat in Trace's driveway. I could see lights on inside the house. 2 hours passed. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the front door, and waiting for something, anything, to confirm or deny my worst fears. When Richard finally emerged, I ducked down in my seat. He got into his car and drove away. I waited another 10 minutes, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then I forced myself to get out of my car and walk up to Trace's front door. My hand was raised to knock when I saw it. A stack of mail on the small table visible through the window next to the door. The top envelope was clear enough to read. Memorial Cancer Center. Patient name, Tracy Morgan. Cancer. The word hit me like a physical blow. I stared at that envelope, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Tracy had cancer? My daughter-in-law was sick, and I did not know? And what did Richard have to do with any of this? I lowered my hand without knocking. I walked back to my car in a daze, my assumptions crumbling around me. This was not about an affair, this was about something else. Something I had not considered because I had been so focused on betrayal that I had not looked for any other explanation. That night, I confronted Richard. No more waiting, no more gathering evidence. I needed answers. And I needed them now. I waited until after dinner, until Richard had settled into his recliner with his evening newspaper. My hands shook as I pulled the bank statements from where I had hidden them in my knitting basket. I stood in front of his chair and dropped them into his lap. "Explain this," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Explain where $23,000 of our savings went." Richard's face went pale. The newspaper slid from his hands to the floor. He looked at the statements, then up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. "Fear. Joan," he said slowly. "I can explain. Then, explain." I crossed my arms over my chest, trying to hold myself together. "Explain why you've been lying to me for 2 years. Explain why I saw your car at Trace's house when you told me you were at the dentist. Explain why I heard you tell her that Brian can never know, that the money has to stay hidden." Richard closed his eyes and let out a long, shaky breath. When he opened them again, they were filled with tears. "I promised Brian I would never tell you," he said quietly. "He made me swear, Joan. He was so ashamed." "Ashamed of what?" I demanded. "What could possibly be worth all these lies?" Richard stood up and went to the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of water with trembling hands, drank half of it, then turned to face me. "Brian lost his job 14 months ago," he said. "He was laid off when his engineering firm downsized. Has been applying everywhere, but he hasn't found anything comparable. Has been working odd jobs, part-time work. Anything to keep their mortgage paid. But it's barely enough. I felt the air leave my lungs. Brian? Jobless? My successful son. The engineer I had been so proud of. Struggling? Why didn't he tell us? Because he was ashamed, Richard said, his voice breaking. Because he knew how proud you were of him. Because I raised him to be a provider, to take care of his family, and he felt like he was failing. When he came to me, he was desperate, Joan. But he made me promise not to tell you. That's not all, is it? I said, thinking of the cancer center envelope. There's more, Richard nodded, wiping his eyes. 2 months after Brian lost his job, Tracy was diagnosed with breast cancer. Stage 3. Their insurance ended when Brian lost his position. They couldn't afford COBRA payments, couldn't afford treatment. Brian sold everything they had of value. He worked 3 jobs trying to keep up. But cancer treatment is expensive, Joan. Impossibly expensive. I sank into a chair, my legs no longer able to hold me up. Tracy had cancer. My daughter-in-law, that sweet girl who always remembered my birthday, who sent me thank you notes for every little thing, was fighting cancer. And I had not known. I had not been there for her. He came to me in the middle of the night. Richard continued, his words tumbling out now like a dam had broken. He was crying. Our grown son. Crying like he did when he was a little boy. He said Tracy needed treatment or she would die, and he had no way to pay for it. He begged me for help, but he also begged me not to tell you. He said he couldn't bear for you to see him as a failure. So you've been giving them money, I said slowly, understanding dawning. The withdrawals, the secret meetings. You've been paying for Trace's treatment. I've been trying, Richard said. I took it out gradually so you wouldn't notice one large sum missing. I thought I could cover it without you ever having to know. Without you ever having to worry. The meetings at Trace's house. I was dropping off cash for her next treatment, checking on how she was feeling, bringing groceries when I knew they were running low, and lying to me, I said, anger flaring again. For over a year, you've been lying to me every single day. I was trying to protect you, Richard said desperately. I was trying to protect Brian's pride and Trace's dignity and your feelings all at once. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought if I could just help them get through this, without you ever having to know they were struggling, then everyone would be okay. But we're not okay, I said. We're the opposite of okay. You've been carrying this alone, lying to your wife, and our son has been too ashamed to ask his own mother for help. How is any of that okay? Richard sat down heavily, his shoulders slumped in defeat. It's not. God help me, Joan. It's not okay. I've been drowning in the weight of this secret. Every time I withdrew money, every time I lied to you about where I was going, every time I saw Tracy getting sicker and knew we didn't have enough to really help them, I felt like I was being torn apart. But I promised Brian. And he's my son. What else could I do? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Brian's name appeared on the screen. I answered with shaking hands. Mom. My son's voice was choked with tears. Mom, I need to tell you something. I can't do this anymore. I've been lying to you, and it's killing me. Brian. Sweetheart. I know, I said gently. Your father just told me. About your job, about Trace's cancer, about everything. There was silence on the other end. Then a sound like my son was choking. Mom, it's worse. Trace's cancer is spreading. The treatments Dad's been helping with, they're not enough. The doctors say she needs an experimental treatment that costs $60,000, and we have nothing left. We've bled Dad dry. We've sold everything, and we still can't save her. I'm so sorry. I'm such a failure. I can't even save my own wife. My maternal instincts, dormant for too long while I played the role of perfect family matriarch, roared to life. You listen to me, Brian Morgan. You are not a failure. You are my son. And you are fighting for your wife's life. We're coming over right now. And we're going to figure this out together. Do you understand me? Together. I hung up, and looked at Richard. "Get your keys. We're going to see our son." Tracy and Brian's house looked the same from the outside. A modest ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood. But when Brian opened the door, I saw the truth written on his face. My son looked like he had aged 10 years. His clothes hung loose on a frame that had lost too much weight. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He looked defeated in a way that broke my heart. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice hollow. "Come in." Tracy sat on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite the warmth of the room. She looked up as we entered, and I saw the illness in her face, the gray pallor of her skin, the exhaustion that went bone deep. But what struck me most was the shame in her eyes. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," she said quietly. "I'm sorry for being such a burden." I crossed the room and sat beside her, taking her cold hands in mine. "You are not a burden. You are my daughter, and I'm sorry that you've been carrying this alone." Then my son, my grown son with his engineering degree, and his pride, collapsed. He sank to the floor and put his head in his hands and sobbed. "I couldn't protect her, Mom. I got laid off and I couldn't find another job. And then Tracy got sick and I've done everything. I've worked every job I could find. I've sold everything we owned. And it's not enough. It's never enough. And now she's going to die because I'm not enough." Richard knelt beside his son, pulling him into an embrace. "You are enough. You've always been enough. This isn't about failure, Brian. This is about a broken system that bankrupts families when they get sick. This is about bad luck and worse timing. But it's not about you not being enough." I looked at Tracy, really looked at her for the first time in months. How had I missed this? How had I been so wrapped up in maintaining appearances, in hosting perfect dinners and sending cheerful texts, that I had failed to see my own family falling apart? "Tell me everything," I said. "No more secrets. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with." So, they told us. Brian explained how the layoff had come without warning, how he had felt like his identity had been stripped away along with his job title, how he had applied to hundreds of positions but kept getting rejected, either overqualified or underqualified, too expensive or too specialized, how his unemployment benefits had barely covered their mortgage. Tracy described the moment she found the lump, the terror of the diagnosis, the impossible choice between treatment and financial ruin when they had no insurance. She talked about the chemotherapy that made her so sick she could barely move, the radiation that burned her skin, the fear that lived in her chest alongside the cancer. Richard admitted how inadequate he felt, how his retirement savings that had seemed so substantial dwindled to nothing in the face of medical bills, how he had lain awake at night doing calculations, trying to figure out how to stretch every dollar far enough. "The experimental treatment is Tracy's last real hope," Brian said. "The standard treatments aren't working. This new therapy has shown promise for her type of cancer. But it's not FDA approved yet, so insurance won't cover it, even if we had insurance. We need $60,000 by the end of next month to enroll her in the trial. We have $2,000 in the bank." The numbers were staggering. Impossible. I thought about my own mother, who had died of pneumonia when I was 30. I remembered standing by her hospital bed, holding her hand, grateful that Medicare and supplemental insurance had covered everything. My mother had died with dignity, without bankrupting her family. Why should my daughter-in-law have to choose between life and financial destruction? I looked around their living room and saw the gaps, the empty shelves where Brian's golf trophies had been, the bare walls where photographs had hung, the worn furniture that had not been replaced because there was no money for replacement. This was what desperation looked like in America. Good people, working people, brought to their knees by illness and circumstance. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked Brian, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "Did you really think I would judge you? That I would love you less because you lost your job?" Brian's face crumpled. "I thought I would disappoint you. You were always so proud of me, Mom. You bragged to your friends about your son, the engineer. I couldn't bear to be the son who failed, who couldn't take care of his own wife. And there it was. The truth I had been avoiding. In trying to build my perfect family, in taking such pride in my son's accomplishments, I had created an environment where he felt he could not be human, could not struggle, could not ask for help without feeling like a failure. I did this, I said quietly. I made you feel like you had to be perfect. No, Mom, Brian protested, but I shook my head. Yes, I did. I was so focused on appearances, on what everyone thought, on maintaining this image of the perfect family, that I forgot what family actually means. It means being there when things fall apart. It means carrying each other when someone stumbles. It means loving each other, especially when we're not perfect. Richard spoke up then. I failed too. I raised you to be stoic, to handle everything yourself, to be the man who provides. I taught you that asking for help was weakness, and then when you needed help, you were too ashamed to ask your own mother because of what I taught you. Tracy wiped tears from her cheeks. I feel like this is all my fault. If I hadn't gotten sick, if I had just stayed healthy, none of this would have happened. Stop, I said firmly. This is no one's fault. Cancer isn't punishment. Job loss isn't failure. These are things that happen to people, to families. What matters is how we respond, and we're going to respond together. We sat in that living room for 3 hours, talking with an honesty that had been missing from our family for too long. I learned that Tracy had considered refusing further treatment to spare Brian the burden. Brian admitted he had thought about selling their house, but they were underwater on the mortgage. Richard confessed that he had considered taking money from his retirement accounts, but the penalties would have eaten up too much of it. As the evening grew late, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and my heart stuttered. Margaret, my sister Margaret, whom I had not spoken to in 12 years. I answered hesitantly. Hello, Joan. Margaret's voice was steady but emotional. Eleanor called me. She told me about Tracy. About Brian. I know we haven't talked since Mother's estate was settled. I know we both said things we regret. But family is family, Joan. And I want to help. I have money set aside. Tell me what they need. I stood and walked to the kitchen, my hand trembling on the phone. Margaret and I had been so close once, before our mother's death had turned us into adversaries, fighting over furniture and jewelry and the summer cabin. We had destroyed our sisterhood over things that suddenly seemed so meaningless. Margaret, I said, my voice breaking. I don't know what to say. Say you'll let me help, she replied. Say you'll let me be a sister again. I've wasted 12 years being angry and stubborn. I don't want to waste any more. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed next to Richard, my mind racing through possibilities and impossibilities, through the weight of what we faced and the bridge that had unexpectedly appeared in the form of my estranged sister. At dawn, I got up and made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and pen, and I began to make lists. Not the grocery lists and to-do lists I usually made, but battle plans. Because that was what this was, a battle for my daughter-in-law's life, for my son's dignity, for my family's future. First, I listed every asset Richard and I owned. Our house, worth about $320,000, with $100,000 still owed on the mortgage. Our retirement accounts, depleted but still holding about $90,000 combined. The vacation cabin in the mountains that we had inherited from my parents and had not used in 4 years, worth approximately $75,000. My mother's jewelry, appraised at $12,000. Our 2 cars, paid off, worth maybe $15,000 together. Life insurance policies with cash value. Then, I researched. I called the cancer center and spent 90 minutes on the phone with their financial counseling department. I learned about payment plans, about pharmaceutical company assistance programs, about clinical trial costs, and insurance gaps. I took notes in careful handwriting, documenting everything. I called our insurance company and asked pointed questions about COBRA extensions and special enrollment periods. I called Medicare to understand what would be available when Richard and I turned 65. I called an attorney friend, Martha, and asked about medical bankruptcy, about protecting assets, about the legal implications of various financial strategies. By noon, I had a plan. It was not a perfect plan, but it was a plan, and it was mine, created not by deferring to my husband's financial expertise, but by my own research and determination. That evening, I called a family meeting, not just Richard and Brian and Tracy, but Eleanor and Margaret too. I asked everyone to come to our house at 7 o'clock. Margaret arrived first, nervous and uncertain. We stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at each other across the chasm of 12 years. Then I stepped forward and hugged my sister, and we both cried. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry for all of it. The fighting, the years we wasted, everything." "Me too," Margaret whispered. "I've missed you so much." Eleanor came next, bringing her steady, calm, and practical nature. Then Brian and Tracy, with Tracy looking exhausted but determined. Richard brought up the rear, having spent the day organizing financial documents at my request. I gathered everyone in our living room. I had prepared coffee and tea, had set out cookies like I was hosting a book club. But this was no social call. This was the most important meeting of my life. "Thank you all for coming," I began, standing in front of the fireplace. "I've spent the last 24 hours doing something I should have been doing all along. I've taken control of my own family's situation. I've researched and planned and made decisions. And I'm going to tell you what we're going to do." I looked at each person in turn, meeting their eyes. First, Tracy, you need to know that you are not a burden, and you never will be. You are part of this family, and families take care of each other. So we are going to get you into that clinical trial, and you are going to fight this cancer with everything you have, and you are not going to worry about money while you do it. Tracy started to protest, but I held up my hand. "I'm not done. Brian, you need to know that losing a job doesn't make you a failure. It makes you a person living in an economy where companies treat employees as disposable. You have been working your heart out to take care of your wife. That makes you a man of honor, not a failure." I turned to Richard. "And you, my husband, need to know that marriage means partnership. It means sharing burdens, not carrying them alone. You tried to protect me, but what I needed was to be trusted to face hard things alongside you." Then, I laid out my plan. Richard and I are going to sell the vacation cabin. We haven't used it in years, and it's just sitting there while Tracy needs it more. That's $75,000. "Mom, we can't ask you to do that," Brian started. But I kept going. "Margaret has generously offered $20,000. I'm accepting her help, not just because we need it, but because family helping family is what we should have been doing all along, instead of nursing old grudges." Margaret smiled through tears and nodded. "I'm organizing a fundraising campaign through our church. Pastor Williams has already agreed to help. I've also researched crowdfunding platforms, and Richard's old firm has offered to help us set one up professionally. I'm not ashamed to ask our community for help, because there's no shame in facing a crisis that's bigger than what one family can handle alone." I paused, taking a breath. The Cancer Center has agreed to start Trace's treatment immediately with a delayed payment plan. They're vouching for us based on our financial plan and our commitment. "Brian and Tracy, you're moving in with us during Trace's treatment. No arguments. You'll save your mortgage money for when Tracy is well, and you can get back on your feet." Tracy was crying openly now. Brian looked stunned. "But more than that," I continued, my voice strengthening. "We're done with secrets. We're done with pride getting in the way of love. We're done pretending everything is perfect when it's not. From now on, this family operates on honesty and mutual support, no matter how hard that is." Eleanor spoke up. "Joan, what do you need from me? Help me organize the fundraiser. You know everyone in town. Help me reach out. Consider it done." I looked at Margaret. "Would you consider staying in town for a while? Trace is going to need help with daily things during treatment, and I can't do it alone." "I was hoping you'd ask," Margaret said. "I'll rent a place nearby. Or, If you have room, I could stay here. We have room, I said. We have plenty of room. Richard stood and walked over to me. Joan, I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you from the beginning. Well, work on that, I said. Well, both work on communicating better. But right now, we need to focus on getting Tracy well. Brian crossed the room and wrapped his arms around me. Thank you, Mom. Thank you for fighting for us. That's what mothers do, I said simply. That's what we should have been doing all along. But even as we made plans and promises, even as hope began to creep back into the room, I knew we were not out of the woods. The money would be tight. The treatment was not guaranteed to work. We still faced enormous challenges. I did not know then that our biggest challenge was still ahead. The doorbell rang. Interrupting our planning, Richard went to answer it and returned with a woman I did not recognize. She was in her early 40s, dressed in business casual, with a badge clipped to her belt. I'm Detective Angela Hart, with the local police department, she said, her expression serious. I need to speak with Richard Morgan about some irregular financial activity that's been flagged by your bank. My heart sank. Of course. The withdrawals? The pattern of money movement? It must have triggered some kind of fraud alert. The bank thought Richard was being scammed or exploited. The large withdrawals over the past 2 years have raised red flags, Detective Hart continued. In cases involving elderly individuals and unusual financial patterns, we're required to investigate potential financial abuse. I need to verify what this money was used for, and if the explanation isn't satisfactory, the bank has frozen your accounts, pending investigation. Our accounts? Frozen. The money we needed for Trace's treatment, for the cabin sale, for everything. Locked away while some investigation played out. I looked at Trace's pale face, at Brian's devastated expression, at the plan we had just built crumbling before it even began, and something in me hardened into steel. How long? I asked Detective Hart. How long would this investigation take? These things can take weeks, sometimes months, she replied. We need to interview everyone involved separately, examine all financial documents, verify the legitimate nature of the transactions. Weeks, I repeated. We don't have weeks. My daughter-in-law has cancer and needs treatment that starts in days, not weeks. I understand this is difficult, Detective Hart said, not unkindly, but we take financial exploitation of seniors very seriously. The pattern of withdrawals here fits a common profile for scams or undue influence. I stood up straighter, feeling something ignite in my chest. For years, I had been passive, deferring, letting others make decisions. No more. Then I suggest you clear your schedule, Detective, because you're about to get everything you need to close this investigation immediately. The next 72 hours were a blur of activity unlike anything I had ever experienced. I transformed from a woman who had spent her life in the background into a force that would not be stopped. First, documentation. Richard and I gathered every scrap of paper related to Trace's illness and Brian's financial situation. Medical bills, diagnostic reports, treatment schedules, pharmacy receipts, layoff notices, job applications, mortgage statements. I organized everything into labeled folders, created a timeline, highlighted key documents. When Detective Hart came to interview us separately, I presented her with a complete dossier that would have impressed any lawyer. This is very thorough, she admitted, flipping through the materials. My daughter-in-law has stage 3 breast cancer, I said evenly. My son lost his job through no fault of his own. My husband was helping them survive. That's not a scam, Detective. That's a family in crisis. But documentation alone would not be enough to unfreeze the accounts quickly. So I went bigger. I called character witnesses. Pastor Williams from our church provided a written statement about our family's integrity and 35 years of community involvement. Richard's former boss at the accounting firm, where Richard had worked for 4 decades, wrote a letter vouching for his character and sound judgment. Our neighbors, Tom and Grace, who had lived next door for 20 years, provided affidavits. I assembled a picture of who we were, who Richard was, making it impossible for anyone to believe he was a victim of exploitation. Then Eleanor had a brilliant idea. "Call the local news," she said. "Tell them your story. Public attention will light a fire under everyone involved." I had never sought attention, had always preferred to stay private. But this was not about me anymore. This was about Trace's life. I called Channel 7 News and asked to speak with their consumer affairs reporter. "I have a story," I told her, "about a family being destroyed by medical debt and about how the very system meant to protect people is now standing in the way of a cancer patient getting treatment." The reporter, a sharp woman named Amanda, came to our house with a camera crew. I told our story on camera, holding nothing back. I talked about Brian's job loss, Trace's cancer, Richard's secret help, the missing money, and now the frozen accounts. I talked about how pride and shame had kept us silent, and how that silence had nearly cost us everything. "This is what medical bankruptcy looks like in America," I said directly to the camera. "This is what happens to working families when someone gets sick. And now, when we've finally come together to fight, when we've finally found the courage to ask for help, the system designed to protect people is preventing us from accessing our own money to save my daughter-in-law's life." The story aired that evening. By morning, it had been picked up by other local stations. By afternoon, it was trending on social media. The response was overwhelming. Richard's old accounting firm called and offered to audit our finances pro bono, providing Detective Hart with a professional verification of every transaction. This alone cut days off the investigation timeline. The firm's senior partner personally vouched for Richard's character and the legitimacy of the withdrawals. The church fundraiser that had been a small, local idea exploded into something bigger. Donations poured in, not just from our congregation but from people all over the state who had seen the news coverage, people who had faced similar struggles, who understood the impossible choices families faced when illness struck. Brian's former colleagues reached out. 3 of them worked at companies that were hiring engineers. They fast-tracked Brian's applications, bypassing the usual bureaucracy. Within 2 days, Brian had 2 job interviews scheduled. Most surprisingly, the Cancer Center's administration called. They had seen the news coverage. "We're starting Trace's treatment tomorrow," the director told me. "We'll work out payment arrangements as we go, but we're not letting bureaucracy delay potentially life-saving care." But the investigation still loomed. Detective Hart moved as quickly as she could. But there were procedures, protocols. Each day that passed was a day Tracy grew weaker. On the 4th day, I got a call that changed everything. A producer from a national morning show wanted to feature our story as part of a series they were doing on medical debt in America. The segment would include a $50,000 grant from the show's Medical Crisis Fund, plus connections to a nonprofit organization that helped families navigate medical financial emergencies. "There's one condition," the producer said. "You'd need to appear on the show and tell your story publicly. All of it. The job loss, the secrets, the family conflict, your role in creating an environment where your son felt he couldn't ask for help. Everything." I looked around our living room, where Tracy rested on the couch with Margaret watching over her, where Brian sat at the computer applying for jobs with newfound determination, where Richard worked on financial spreadsheets with Eleanor's help. This family that had been fractured by secrets and pride, now bound together by truth and purpose. For 38 years, I had protected my privacy, maintained appearances, kept family matters inside the family. I had built walls around what people could know about us, presenting only the perfect image to the world. But those walls had nearly killed my daughter-in-law. That pride had nearly destroyed my son. That silence had nearly cost me my marriage and my sister. "I'll do it," I told the producer. "Well, I'll do it. If sharing our story can help even one other family avoid what we went through, it's worth it." The national appearance was scheduled for the following Monday. But we did not have to wait that long for resolution. On Friday afternoon, Detective Hart called. "The investigation is closed," she said. "The accounting firm's audit verified everything. The bank is unfreezing your accounts. I'm sorry for the delay, but we had to be thorough." "I understand," I said, and I meant it. "You were doing your job, protecting people who might be vulnerable. I can't fault you for that." "For what it's worth," Detective Hart added, "I've been in law enforcement for 20 years, and this is one of the most clear-cut cases of a family taking care of each other I've ever seen. You should be proud of what you've built here." That weekend, we appeared on the national morning show. The whole family sat on that famous couch, under bright lights, and we told America our story. Brian talked about the shame of unemployment, the feeling of failure when he could not provide for his wife. Tracy described the terror of cancer with no insurance, the impossible choices between treatment and bankruptcy. Richard admitted to keeping secrets, to trying to protect everyone, and instead creating distance. Margaret talked about wasted years of estrangement, of letting pride destroy sisterhood, and I talked about my role in all of it, about creating a family culture where perfection was expected, where struggle was hidden, where asking for help felt like failure. I was honest about my mistakes, my blind spots, my years of being passive when I should have been present. The segment ended with an update. Tracy had begun her experimental treatment. The combination of the show's grant, our fundraising, the sale of the cabin, Margaret's contribution, and the frozen accounts finally being released meant we had enough. Brian had accepted a job offer at a medical device company that specialized in cancer treatment equipment. Our family was healing. Together. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of messages poured in from people sharing their own stories of medical debt, of family secrets, of pride that prevented people from asking for help. Our story had touched a nerve because it was not unique. It was heartbreakingly common. 3 months later, a state legislator contacted me. She was introducing a bill to expand medical debt protections and create assistance programs for families in crisis. Would I be willing to testify before the legislative committee? I had never imagined myself as an advocate, a public figure, someone who testified before government officials. But I had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is tell the truth about our struggles, because in our truth, others find permission to share theirs. "Yes," I told her. "I'll testify." 6 months after that terrible Tuesday, when I pulled up to Trace's house and heard voices through the window, I stood in our backyard on a warm Sunday afternoon and marveled at how much had changed. Tracy sat in a lawn chair, a blanket across her lap despite the heat. She was thin, her hair growing back in soft curls after chemotherapy. But she was alive. The experimental treatment was working. Her latest scans showed the tumors shrinking. She had months of treatment ahead. But the doctors were cautiously optimistic. She attended a cancer support group every Thursday and had become a fierce advocate for other patients navigating the medical system. Brian stood at the grill with Richard, the two of them laughing about something. My son looked different now, lighter somehow, despite everything he had been through. The new job suited him. He told me once that working on medical devices, knowing his work might help other families facing what Tracy faced, gave his engineering degree meaning it had never had before. He was in therapy too, working through issues of perfectionism and shame, learning to ask for help without feeling like a failure. Richard and I had started couples counseling. It had been awkward at first, sitting in a stranger's office talking about our marriage, but slowly, we learned to communicate in ways we never had before. Richard learned to share his worries, instead of carrying them alone. I learned to be an active partner in our financial life instead of deferring to his expertise. Our relationship had depth now that it had lacked before, built on genuine partnership instead of comfortable habit. We sold the vacation cabin. It was bittersweet, letting go of the place where we had spent so many summers with Brian when he was young. But every time I felt sad about it, I looked at Tracy and knew we had made the right choice. The cabin was just a place. Tracy was family. Margaret had rented an apartment in town. She came to dinner every Sunday, and sometimes during the week, she and I would meet for coffee and just talk. We were rebuilding our sisterhood slowly, carefully, learning each other again after 12 years apart. She told me once that helping Tracy had given her a purpose she had been missing. In reaching out to us, she had found her way back to herself. Eleanor sat at the patio table, chatting with Margaret about a book they had both read. Eleanor, my steady friend, who had stood by me through the worst of it, who had helped organize the fundraiser, who had called Margaret on my behalf, who had believed in me when I struggled to believe in myself. The fundraiser had raised $17,000 beyond what we needed for Trace's care. With the family's blessing, I had donated that money to the nonprofit organization the morning show had connected us with, the one that helped other families facing medical crises. They were using it to create information packets about financial assistance programs, resources most people did not know existed. My testimony before the state legislature had contributed to real change. The bill expanding medical debt protections and creating assistance programs had passed. It was not perfect, not enough, but it was something. And I had discovered that I was good at advocacy, at speaking truth about difficult things. I had been invited to speak at 2 community forums about medical debt and at a conference for cancer patient advocates. I looked at my family gathered in our backyard, and I thought about the woman I had been 6 months ago, the woman who drove to her daughter-in-law's house to deliver apple pie and discovered a truth that shattered her world. I had thought, in that moment when I heard Richard's voice through the window, that I was witnessing the destruction of my family. I had been so certain of betrayal, so quick to assume the worst, because I had built our family life on surfaces rather than depths. I knew the outward appearances, but not the inner struggles. I knew how to host a perfect dinner party, but not how to have an honest conversation about failure or fear or need. The real betrayal was not what Richard did. It was what we all did to each other by keeping secrets, by valuing pride over connection, by creating a family culture where struggle had to be hidden and help could not be asked for without shame. I had raised Brian to be strong, independent, successful, but I had forgotten to teach him that strength is not the absence of struggle, but the courage to face it honestly. I had been so proud of his achievements that I made achievement feel like the price of my love. No wonder he could not tell me when he lost his job. No wonder he felt like a failure instead of a man facing an impossible situation with courage and determination. I thought about all the years I had deferred to Richard, letting him handle finances, make decisions, carry burdens alone. I had told myself I was being a supportive wife, respecting his expertise. But really, I had been abdicating partnership. A marriage is not one person carrying everything, while the other maintains ignorance. It is 2 people facing life together, sharing both the burdens and the decisions. When the bank froze our accounts and Detective Hart investigated us, I had felt violated, angry at the intrusion. But later, I understood. The detective was doing exactly what she should have done, protecting vulnerable people from exploitation. The fact that we were not being exploited did not make her caution wrong. And that investigation, painful as it was, forced me to take control in ways I never had before. It forced me to learn our financial situation, to make plans, to advocate fiercely for my family. The publicity, which I had dreaded, had become a gift. In sharing our story, we had given others permission to share theirs. I received letters from people all over the country telling me about their own struggles with medical debt, with unemployment, with the shame that keeps families isolated in their suffering. By being vulnerable publicly, we had created connection and understanding. Margaret told me something profound a few weeks ago. She said that when our mother died, and we fought over her estate, we had both been grieving and angry and trying to control something in a situation where we felt powerless. We had destroyed our relationship over furniture and jewelry because we could not face the real loss, which was our mother. The 12 years we wasted being estranged taught her that grudges have a cost, that pride is expensive, that family is worth more than being right. Tracy's cancer, Brian's job loss, Richard's secrets, the investigation, all of it could have destroyed us. And it nearly did. But instead, it broke us open in ways that let the truth finally pour in. And truth, I had learned, is the foundation of everything that matters. I walked over to where Tracy sat and kissed the top of her head. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "Good," she said. And meant it. Tired, but good. "I'm glad we're all here together." "Me too." Brian called out that the burgers were ready. We gathered around the picnic table, passing plates and condiments, talking and laughing. It was not perfect. Tracy got tired quickly and would need to rest soon. Brian still had moments of anxiety about money. Richard and I still had to consciously work at open communication. Margaret and I were still learning how to be sisters again. But it was real. It was honest. And that made it more valuable than any perfect image I had tried to maintain before. As we ate, I thought about the question I had wrestled with for months. What would I tell other families facing similar struggles? I would tell them that asking for help is not weakness, but wisdom. That pride is a luxury no one can afford when lives are at stake. That secrets create distance even when they are meant to protect. That families need honesty more than they need perfection. I would tell wives to be active partners in their marriages, not passive dependents, to know their family's financial situation, to participate in decisions, to share burdens, instead of letting one person carry everything alone. I would tell parents that our children need to see us struggle and recover, need to know that failure is not permanent, and that asking for help is strength, not shame, that our pride in their achievements should never overshadow our love for their humanity. I would tell siblings that grudges are exhausting and life is too short. That forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves as much as the person we forgive. And I would tell everyone that vulnerability is not something to fear but something to embrace. When we share our struggles, we give others permission to share theirs. We break the isolation that shame creates. We build connection through our common humanity, rather than our carefully constructed images. That Tuesday afternoon 6 months ago, when I stood outside Trace's house and listened through that window, I had been certain I was losing everything. And in a way, I was. I was losing the illusion of a perfect family, the comfortable ignorance of problems I had not seen, the passive role I had played for nearly 40 years. But what I gained was so much more valuable. I gained a real family, one built on truth rather than appearances. I gained a partnership with my husband, instead of a hierarchy. I gained my sister back after 12 years. I gained the knowledge that I was strong enough to fight for the people I loved. I gained a purpose beyond maintaining surfaces. Most of all, I gained Trace's life. My daughter-in-law, who sat in my backyard on this sunny afternoon, thin and tired but alive, laughing at something Margaret said. If I had not gone to her house that day, if I had not overheard what I did, we might have lost her while pride and secrets kept us all apart. Sometimes the thing you think is destroying your life is actually saving it. Sometimes you have to see everything clearly, stripped of all pretense, before you can truly live. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to set, casting golden light across our backyard, I looked at the faces of the people I loved. My husband, my son, my daughter-in-law, my sister, my friend. Imperfect people who had made mistakes and faced crises and come through it together. This was my family, not the perfect image I had tried to maintain, but the real, struggling, honest, loving family we had become. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Before we finish the evening, I want to ask you something. Have you ever kept a secret to protect someone, only to realize that the secret itself was causing more harm? Have you ever watched someone you love struggle and not known how to help? Or have you been the one too proud to ask for help when you desperately needed it? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story touched your heart or made you think about your own family relationships differently, please like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes we all need reminders that vulnerability is strength, and that asking for help is courage, not weakness. And if you want to hear more stories about real families facing real challenges, about the lessons we learn through struggle and the strength we find in honesty. Please subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these important stories. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community where we can share our struggles and our triumphs without judgment. May you have the courage to face truth in your own life, the wisdom to ask for help when you need it, and the grace to offer help when others are struggling. Remember, family is not about being perfect. It is about being present, being honest, and being there for each other when it matters most. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.